going to stand on the stage, is that high enough?
It doesn't go any higher.
No, I'm talking about putting on the table or something. We're going to stand on the stage.
Is the sound going to be okay back here?
Yes, it's a lot closer than it was before.
So it needs tightening up.
I know.
You just leave it like that.
Yeah. I'd press record now.
It's on. Look, recording. 1 minute 53 seconds. Happy?
You doing that?
Yeah. Next question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
There you go. Right, good evening. The new councillor comes into the room. Good, Andrew. Good evening, everybody. My name is Phillip Lee, I'm your Member of Parliament. This is one of, at the moment I do 4 of these meetings a year, rotating around the constituency. Just an open question and answers, very much like the sort of question time format that you will see later on this evening on BBC. I have no idea what's going to be asked. I try to be as candid as possible. I will present sort of the government's position, but if I have an additional view, i.e. my own personal view on what I think it should be, then I will preface what I say as that my own personal opinion is this. I think it's important that MPs are straightforward, are honest, are candid, as much as they can be. Being in government and being in politics is often a compromise, it can often be very difficult, but I try to be as straightforward as possible and try to give you a straightforward answer to your question. Now, I can't know everything about everything. I'll do my best, but there will be occasions where I don't know the answer, particularly with reference to local government issues. And I've found when I've done these meetings around the constituency, some people understandably don't know when it is the local government responsibility and whether it is my responsibility or whether it's government, as in central government responsibility. So there are times when I will say, I don't know, but that's not actually, I don't know about that, and I will, Mark, who works for me at the bank, will take out some details and we will answer the question, and if you provide an email address or a formal address, we will then respond accordingly. So without further ado, fire away. Who wants to ask the first question?
Philip, you're working...
We just need the microphone because...
yes.
Oh, that was the other thing. I needed just to mention one thing. We do film this. The only reason we film this is because then I put it on my website so that people who couldn't get here tonight, maybe the weather was too bad or whatever, they get to view it. So it's uploaded. That's the only reason I do it. Also, I do it so that people can see that Phillip Lee tries to be straightforward and candid in his answers. It is about trying to say to people that this is how politics is going to be going forward, and I'm trying to be like this as a member of Parliament. So that's the purpose for it. Anyway, fire away.
Is this working?
Switch it
Is it
on.
on?
Is it on? It's on. Red light now. Thank you. Philip, Jean Nancy Boyle, local councillor. As a working MD and now MP, what are your thoughts about the Liverpool care pathway? There will be many older people going into hospital and having very serious thoughts, likewise their families, how their elderly family members can be protected. But it seems to be a UDI declared situation by
Okay.
the doctors.
Right.
It's worrying.
Okay. Yours to it might be right, the question is about Liverpool care pathway, for those of you who might not have heard about it back. Right, my opinion on this is I worked at a hospice for a few months in Aylesbury, the Florence Nightingale Hospice, as a doctor, junior. And it probably was the best period of my clinical career in terms of the level of care. Hospices are populated by some of the very best people you will ever meet, the staff. They're incredibly caring, thoughtful individuals. And I was in awe, actually, of the level of care that we offered. And interestingly, I make the point that hospices are not funded directly by the National Health Service. Okay, so when people start talking to you about how wonderful the care is in the hospice, this isn't the National Health Service. This is actually an independent organisation, often, with some state funding. But the Thames Valley Hospice is 10% state funding, 90% charitable funding. So when we start talking about a broader discussion about the provision of care and healthcare and the funding of healthcare, just bear that in mind when you go to a hospice, because most of us have had experiences of hospices about the level of care that your relatives or friends have received, the way in which they've had that care given to them. It hasn't been provided by the National Health Service. That's just the aside. With reference to the Liverpool care pathway, this was being developed actually, this technique, this approach, as I recall, when I was working in the hospice. There was talk about this, this way of trying to have a fixed pathway so that you knew where you were in terms of your provision of your terminal care, your palliative care. I can understand this and I'm supportive of the pathway. Where I think there have been some mistakes, as I understand it, that there have been some incentives, some financial incentives in the system in order to bring about the fact that that pathway is used in hospitals or in hospices up and down the country. And I think that was perhaps, if that's what's happened, I think that was ill-advised. Because the problem is then you get the sort of tabloid headline, profit incentive to kill off patients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? The idea that anybody in palliative care would either ever entertain euthanasia for a profit is just beyond my comprehension. Everybody in palliative care that I've ever met has just been outstanding. They tend to be the most caring, thoughtful professionals that you will meet in healthcare. I think the coverage of it has been somewhat insensitive, but I do think the decision to attach a payment to the implementation of the pathway was ill-advised because it could be misinterpreted. Because ultimately, when you're in that situation, you've got a loved one who is dying, is in the final weeks or months or whatever of their life, you are emotionally vulnerable, you're quite tense, it's an emotive, it's a difficult period. So any suggestion that the best isn't being done for the patient is difficult to take. And the final thing I would say, and perhaps controversially, but in my clinical experience, it isn't always the families who have the best interests of the patient at heart. And this is a very difficult area, but it isn't the case. And sometimes the medical profession have to take the responsibility of making an appropriate decision about care. And that's a sensitive area, but the problem is it's not necessarily put over very well in the media. But that's what this pathway is about. And I would just stress that I'm a supporter of the concept of this pathway. Next question.
My name is still John McNabb. I guess that you might get asked some questions about housing, and planning, and road research authority, and so on. I wanted to ask a question related to that. There's a thing called the South East Plan, which says a huge number of houses have got to be built in the South East, 16,000, I believe, in Bracknell Forest. And I believe it was the previous government that made it. I believe that one of the first things that Mr. Cameron said was he was going to scrap it. When is it going to go?
Okay, this is an area where actually the implementation of this is a local government decision, not a national government decision in terms of the implementation.
Yeah.
The national government set the targets. Under the last government, there were 26,000 homes earmarked for the Bracknell Wokingham area, which is quite remarkable if you think it's a huge number. What happened was we did promise to scrap it. And what has now happened is that there's been a case of we're going to incentivise people to build homes. But there isn't the same headline figure as there once was. Interestingly, in the Wokingham borough, they have enough in stock as such as the borough, because they've earmarked different areas. They actually have enough in the bank, so to speak, which is why they're somewhat frustrated about the decision vis-à-vis Reading University, as I gather. The same in Bracknell Forest. I think things are slightly more challenging to meet the figures. Bracknell itself is still growing. You will see Jones Park is still growing. The TRL site, the difficulty there, sir, it's a brownfield site. I gather it's the most developable brownfield site in Berkshire. So it's going to get built on. The issue is what is a sympathetic build, and if you are going to build, and this is the point I've been pressing upon Bracknell Forest Council, is this going to be attached to Bracknell, or is this going to be attached to Crowthorne? If it's attached to Crowthorne, where are the GP practices? Where are the schools, school places? Because at the moment getting into Edgebarrow is challenging, to say the least. And my concern is that the way in which it could be developed, it could end up being adjoined, so you'll have somebody living on the TRL site, or whatever it's called in the future, believing that they're being told it's a Crowthorne development, because there's a ribbon of trees between the two, but actually being sent to East Hampstead School and working in Bracknell and travelling to Bracknell. So my concern about it is I have no control over whether that site's developed or not. To be honest with you, sir, when it makes sense, it will be developed. There's absolutely no question. My concern is that it has to be developed sensitively, and if it's going to be part of the Crowthorne, then so be it, but you have to then also provide school places. That then opens up the problem that the Edgebarrow site is quite small, and the GP practices are also quite small, and the lists are full, and all of those things. But on a broader point, because I want to move on to something which I have an opinion on the national stage with regards to housing in the South East. I did a Royal Society event. It was at Henley Cricket Club, discussing Thames Valley economy about 18 months ago. Long time. It was when I'd only just been an MP for a few months. And at that meeting, I made a rather unusual statement that I didn't want any more economic growth in my constituency. And everyone sort of looked at me and said, "What do you mean you didn't want any more economic economic growth. I said, well, it's all very well calling for economic growth, but with economic growth comes housing, comes pollution, comes traffic congestion, comes all of those things. I said, and the other difficulty is that we've already got a population who want their children and their grandchildren to live in the area. If you build more and more businesses, the house prices are going to keep going up, and you're just driving something. What is the end to this? You're going to end up with congested roads, people living in boxes, schools full, hospitals bursting, etc. Interestingly, in the audience, there was a sort of quite a receptive response to this suggestion. The problem in Whitehall is they're looking at the figures and they're thinking, where can we get economic growth? I know where we get economic growth, we'll get it in the southeast of England, because they're good at it. Now, we could do with some economic growth in the northeast of England. We could do with some economic growth in the north of Wales. I mean, Wales, over 70% of the economy is state. Over 70%. You want to go and find out where socialism is taking place? Go to Wales. Over 70% of GDP of Wales is state. And yet, it's a bit easier to say, right, build some houses in the southeast of England. So I've been pushing this and saying, well, hang on a minute, what's your maximum? The other thing I will say, though, is there is this difficulty. We don't want to become a retirement home. We don't want to become an area which has just got people who can afford to live around here, which actually, and you have to look at the statistics, they're quite shocking. Most people in sort of that baby boomer generation and older have all the money in this country, certainly have all the property wealth. So they'll be the only ones who can afford to live around here. I think a place like Crowthorne, the wider constituency, benefits from having a cross-section of ages. There is, I suppose what I'm saying, so there's a lot of difficulty with this whole area because we want it both ways. We want leafy gardens and woodland and what have you, but we also want our children to be able to afford houses. We also want jobs for our children and our grandchildren. And it's a difficult balance. I think the only way forward is to try and stimulate the economy further afield and also accept that we're going to be living in smaller homes in the future. You know, I think my home is pretty modest in size. I have a nice location, but it's pretty modest. I look at my father's home, I look at my father's generation home, bigger. I don't think I'm going to afford them. And I just have to accept that. It's just the way it is. Next question.
My name is Linda Evans. I'd like to ask you about the English Parliament. I saw the TV recently that was thinking of changing their income tax, and it seems that Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have benefits, and the English always seem to miss out.
Yes, you invite me to slap my Celtic friends around for the profligacy. Yes, I mean, I think the previous government's constitutional changes were ill thought through, and I think they were unfair as well. I mean, how come Scotland gets a parliament, England doesn't? How come Scotland gets to vote on leaving the Union, but England doesn't? How come the Welsh get an assembly, which incidentally 52% of 26% of the population voted for, so not many people. Okay? When I ran down there in 2005 and Blimey went, I didn't meet many people who liked the Welsh Assembly or who wanted the Welsh Assembly. And Northern Ireland, I think, is a slightly different situation. But I agree with you, there is this democratic deficit, the sense that the English pick up the tab and everyone else gets representation. I mean, why does Scotland, and you can ask, I don't know if there are any Liberal Democratic activists in the room, but they're apparently voting against the redrawing of the boundaries, the constituency boundaries at the end of next year. Rather petulantly, I would suggest, because they didn't get something they wanted. I would ask them, how on earth can it be justifiable that somebody in Scotland has a constituency, I think, of about 40,000? My total population is 77,000 voters. And yet they're voting against the change in Scotland. Why are they doing that? Ask them that question. Anybody who wants to know who's a Liberal Democrat, ask them why they're doing that. Because not only do they have a Scottish Parliament, they have over-representation at Westminster. And if you think that doesn't matter, you wait until 2015 anybody who votes Conservative in 2015, I can predict one thing: there will be more Conservative voters in England than any other party. Generally there is. Well, in 97 it was different, but generally it is. What could happen, and what may very well happen, is that we get a non-Conservative government in 2015, and England has voted Conservative. And the reason you get a non-Conservative government is because of over-representation of MPs in Scotland, because they've got smaller constituencies by population. Now, hands up who thinks that's fair. There's no fairness in that. I wouldn't want to see an English Parliament, but I didn't want to see a Scottish Parliament, and I didn't want to see a Welsh Assembly. I'm British. But we are where we are, and I think we need to address this fast, because you're not the only person who's asked me about this. I think there's quite a lot of bitterness in England, particularly in northern England, which has some pretty challenging economic circumstances, and they want to ask, why is it when I go across the border and I get free residential care for the elderly, I get free tuition fees, as the list goes on, how are they paying for this? How are they paying for this? And they will go on about Scottish oil, inverted commas, not British. It is British, but actually, if an SNP person knocks on your door, which they're not going to, even if you're Scottish, because you're an expat Scot, you don't get a vote in the referendum, something which is also disgraceful. Just point out to them that actually international law, maritime law, the border of a country into the sea is extended from the border on land. So if you know the border, that's the border with England and Scotland. Am I getting that the right way around? Yeah? It's doing this, isn't it? If that continues off to the North Sea, that takes out most of the oil fields. And it's actually English. Yeah, it's Scottish. And they don't like pointing it out, because guess what? Alex Salmond wants that, doesn't he? He wants it to go straight out into the sea. But that isn't the way the international maritime law works. So even that doesn't pay for the free residential care, the free tuition fees. And also the fact that English students go to Scotland, they have to pay tuition fees, but a student comes to the rest of Europe, they don't. Anyway, you've touched a nerve. So there's not much you can do about it. They've got a parliament, there's a Welsh Assembly, that's there. That isn't going to change probably in my political career, so that's where we are. But we need to change the number of MPs in Scotland soon, and we need to find a way of Scottish MPs not voting on issues that only affect England and Wales, such as the National Health Service. When we talk about the National Health Service at Westminster, we're not talking about Scotland's National Health Service. We're only talking about England and Wales. And yet, all the Scottish MPs, which are predominantly Labour, vote on National Health Service legislation on the floor of the House. Sorry, that's disgraceful.
If we could go back to the economy, I live in the constituency here, but I work at Heathrow. Heathrow is 98% full. The economy of the UK is very Heathrow dependent. Be interested to hear your views on how we get out the current catch-22 of no growth, limited links to Asia with no opportunity to add them, and huge taxes on departure.
Thank you for that question. I'm really pleased that it's come up, actually. The final bit about the air passenger duty, I contributed in the debate that recently took place in the Chamber on it, and I actually made an intervention. I didn't make a speech, because there were so many people who wanted to make a speech, I wasn't called. But I made an intervention in which I said that I found it remarkable that we were inhibiting flights and the passengers moving out to far-flung destinations like China and Brazil and Mexico, the very areas of the world which are growing economically. And it seemed remarkable to me that that's what we were hammering the tax, and we were reducing with regards to access in terms of flight slots. But the broader issue, and I've made representations, as have a number of members of Parliament on this, the broader issue of hub airport and of what's the future for air capacity, airport capacity in Britain. But let's talk about it's mainly South East of England. This constituency, and indeed quite a few in the sort of Sussex, Surrey, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, perhaps Hertfordshire, is very dependent upon airports for its economy. I mean, the reason that Bracknell has the headquarters of so many different companies is because of Heathrow, in part, and some of it to do with the skilled workforce, some of it's to do with M4 and M3, of course, but the airport does matter a lot. Heathrow is in an appalling location. It should never have been there. It is just, it's once more evidence of how we don't do strategic thinking in Britain. If you go anywhere else in the world, you find their airports are in much better locations, and they seem to be able to build them very quickly with fantastic rail services, and we seem to struggle with this. Some of this is the legacy of being first to do everything. Underground is an example of that. Some of it is also to do with population density, too many people living in the area, and so there's problems with squeezing an airport, overflying noise, etc., etc. But we've got to do something about it, because, as you rightly say, Heathrow is full to capacity. I've lost count of the number of times I've come into that airport, and it's actually been shorter to fly from Switzerland or Germany to above Heathrow than it has to take the shortest time than it has been to actually land and then park. It's an absolute disgrace, it's an embarrassment. Now the solutions to this, well, there are a few knocking around. The latest one I saw was to build an airport at Twyford, just north of Bracknell. There's a Chinese-backed consortium that's looking at Twyford and also looking at Banbury, up on the HS2 route of the train. I'd be interested to know what the response locally would be to Twyford. I think that people would be broadly supportive, actually, because the noise, in terms of the approach, would be pushed further west over less population-dense areas. People of Finchampstead don't like the fact that they've got planes turning over them. Trust me, I get the letters. But the positive is that there are the people who are unemployed in the area, who the unskilled, and people will get the retail jobs based at the airport. And also, it would solidify, essentially say, this is an economically vibrant area for the rest of our lives. And so they're the positives. Obviously, there are negatives, and I'm not going to open that up because it's not even on the table, but I just saw a report in the Independent. There's obviously Boris Island, and there's the Norman Foster Thames Estuary things, which are, on paper, seem very clever, seem very impressive, very expensive, because they have to reclaim. There's also the problem of the RSPB, who are the #1 lobbying organisation that could ever encounter in terms of its size, and there's also a problem with Schiphol in terms of approach to that as well, I'm told. But I also think there's a problem with the fact that the whole of the west of London, all of our economy, has been predicated upon there being a hub airport nearby. So I'm drawn at the moment to the Heathwick solution, which has been put forward, which involves Gatwick being extended. The covenant on Gatwick runs out in 2019, and having 2 runways at Gatwick, additional terminal. It does involve a 3rd runway at Heathrow, which will not go down very well with my Prime Minister, but that's what it involves. It also has been suggested that you would also connect with Northolt and extend Northolt and make Northolt a domestic terminal. So essentially you would have 3 sites. Now if you connect them with a maglev train, like the one that's just been built in Shanghai, you can actually travel between London Heathrow and Gatwick in just under 15 minutes. These trains go very fast. And you can then also go on to Northolt, probably about 5 minutes. Now to do that, when I've looked at the figures, you're looking at about 3 billion for the train, and you're looking, it's a few billion for the runways each and the terminals. It's much less than 35 billion for Boris Island. And also, it'll get done more quickly. So that's pretty much where I am on it. I think that that's more doable. It's not ideal. If it involves compulsory purchase of homes in Hounslow, then sorry, so be it. This is a national strategic asset. The country needs to be connected. North America, South America, Asia, and Australia. I'm sorry, that's just the reality of the world we live in, and there's no way of doing it other than by plane. And so that's where I stand on it. At the moment, it's going out to a consultation, which I think is understandable. I suspect the solutions will involve what we've got more than going for one big. But if it does go for the big Thames Estuary site, I can live with that if they put a fast train all the way through We've got Crossrail going to Maidenhead. Well, that's going to be extended to Reading. And they extend it all the way through to the Thames Estuary Airport. You're looking at about 45 minutes. Something like that. I think that's acceptable. But let's wait and see. But you can probably tell where I am on it.
Thank you. To do with the dreaded crime commissioners, as I call them, I just wonder, I've got a question, I think, and I've got a comment that I'd like you to answer. First of all, who was the bright spark we decided we would have the alternate vote system, new to our whole political system? The second question really was, how did it become so political, to name that Michael Meggetts and John Prescott too? That's the question really. The comment though, Wokinham's turnout 13.7%. I can't believe it. I can't believe there were 533 spoilt papers. Would you like to comment on those two figures?
Okay. The concept, and hear me out, Jeremy, the concept of having a democratically elected individual responsible for policing, I think is a good thing. At the moment, you have a committee that the general public don't know exists, on which councillors sit who they don't know sit on them. It is not ideal. People don't understand the system. There was never a suggestion of politicising the police force. The operational actions of the police were always going to be independent. It was about trying to have some accountability locally for the police. So people could say, well, I actually think they should be checking the drug addicts out in Bracknell instead of going to check them, doing the speed tickets there, or whatever. There's those sort of things that people say. So I thought the concept of it was right. What I thought was troublesome about it is, one, Thames Valley as itself was a region, it's very difficult. It's not sort of like the PCC for Wiltshire, it's a defined county. Thames Valley is a difficult region for people to get their head around, because you can be down in Finchaxton, you can be up in Milton Keynes. It's sort of, it's a difficult region for people to understand the concept of it. Two, the timing of it in November was appalling. This was a decision made by the Liberal Democrats. Okay, so blame them, as was the AV thing, so blame them as well for that. The turnout was not good enough. I think when you have something new, it's never going to be great. Two, I think the time of year was also didn't help. And also, I think people were not that engaged with it, and I certainly picked up that politically people weren't engaged with it as much as they would have been. But I'm actually encouraged by the concept of it. Next time round, it's taking place in May, at the time of local elections, and I think at that point you will see an uplift in voting, and also people will be aware of what that person has been doing. But I agree with you, it wasn't our finest hour in terms of democracy. But I think there is a broader problem with regards to people actually exercising their vote. We had a 67% turnout in my election in 2010, which people viewed as being quite good. Personally, you know, I'm a bit of an anorak. I watched the sort of the coverage of the 1964 election on BBC Parliament a couple of years ago, and there were turnouts in the low 90s in 1964. I don't know what's happened. Perhaps a memory of a war is now passing. People don't value their vote as much as they should do, and I think there is as much responsibility upon me as a politician to enthuse as there is a responsibility upon individuals to vote themselves. And I think we all should feel concerned about turnout, and we should all tell anybody who didn't vote, well, why didn't you